Welcome to Beyond the Pages. I'm your host, Arlene Reyes from Donnelly.Media. In this podcast, we go beyond the headlines, diving deep into the stories that matter with our team of journalists. Stay with us as we uncover the details, insights, and untold perspectives behind the news.
Donnelly.Media presents Beyond the Pages. Captain Tree Service sponsors today's episode. When a disaster happens, call the captain. 856-796-3536.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Pages. I'm your host, Arlene Reyes, and I am sitting with our editor for our lifestyle magazines, Julia Bozzone. Hi, Julia. How are you today?
Great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, Julia, you joined Donnelly.Media a few months ago, and you took over the editorial content and in our editorial space for the magazines in our lifestyle section. And I just wanted to let our audience know a little bit about you and who you are and the outlook for the magazines. So can you tell us a little bit about your history within the editorial world?
Yeah, of course. So my whole career, I've worked in magazines. That's about 18 years. And I was a book lover as a kid. And as a kid, I was very much into culture and the arts. Then later on, I got more into business and history and all these other things. But I always envisioned myself working in magazines. And I was at the New York Times for 11 years. I was at the New York Times Magazine and T, the New York Times Style Magazine. And before that, I also worked at Interview Magazine, Andy Warhol's magazine where people interview each other, celebrities interview each other. And then there's also front of the book pieces on up and coming artists and actors and writers. And I also worked at Spin, Rolling Stone, Men's Journal. So it's a small world.
Right. Yeah.
And I filled in at Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and Architectural Digest. So I've had the chance to work with many, many different editors and see many different styles of doing things. At the New York Times, I worked closely with the story editor and the writer on stories. I was a research editor, which is essentially a fact checker.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go through these 8,000, 10,000 word stories and line by line,
Right,
and talk to the sources, do independent research, and then say, well, we can't say this, we could say this. So I'd make line suggestions. So I saw a lot of ways that I've encountered a lot of issues. I've seen different ways that people have dealt with problems and run magazines. So I think that gives me a great background to come to Donnelly.Media. And these lifestyle magazines that we have are the perfect place for me to be because the magazines are free. So they're just delivered to people. They're named after the zip codes. And I think magazines are something people read for pleasure. It's about enjoyment. And so I don't take our readers' attention for granted at all. The magazines are designed to be appealing and captivating to the casual reader, both in terms of the story and in terms of the visuals, the layout, everything. So I'm very big on having a gripping opening, a satisfying ending. I love playing with the headlines and the display text. It's all about drawing the reader in and telling an interesting story. And with magazines, we have the luxury to fuss over the words and finesse and go back and ask follow-up questions if there's something more that I want as the editor. And so I think we're telling some really interesting stories.
What would you find the difference of, because all of the previous publications that you work for were more national or some international widespread topics. What is the difference between that and something dedicated to a certain zip code?
What's interesting is that we're giving people within these zip codes a very similar treatment. And there's so many interesting stories that never get told, you know.
Right.
It's people who live in New York or LA or they're famous or something, or, you know, they're politicians, they're in the government. So I found that there's a lot of really interesting stories happening around here. So it's giving a similar kind of treatment to the people and events and groups and work that's being done in each of those towns or neighborhoods.
Tell me a little bit about some of the stories that you've had your hands in recently with the Donnelly.Media magazines that so far have extremely piqued your interests or that you found the most captivating.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. But before, I just wanted to say, you know, we're giving magazine style profile treatment to people who are doing great work in the world, you know, like this amazing Spanish teacher and ESL teacher who won an award for being named one of top 50 educators around the world. But we also do stories that are more local. Like we just did a story in an upcoming issue on this talented beat maker at the Collingswood High School. And he's in a 3-year digital audio production program. And he wants to be a music producer. And so it's just it's interesting to learn about the program, to learn, you know, what this kid is doing. And the teacher was also interviewed and photographed. So it's not all, some of the stories are, you know, more local, just someone doing something interesting in town. So there is a wide range of kinds of topics that we cover. In terms of my favorite stories, there's so many already, even since the beginning of December. There was a very interesting story about a muralist, Cesar Viveros, and he made a mural 20 years ago in Philadelphia called My Life, My Path, My Destiny. And over the years, he's had people, you know, come up to him. He's run into people on the street who worked on the mural that he made 20 years ago. And that was one of the follow-up questions that I had the writer ask, because she said, you know, he's run into people who worked on the mural. And I said, tell me more, you know, in what context and what are they doing now? What did they say? And so that was a very interesting story.
I do enjoy, so the muralist that you're talking about was in our Hook magazine, which covers the Fishtown area in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And that particular magazine is much more artsy, I would say, than some of the other ones. They all include art, but that one we do have a series. So we do have running series on all of them. But the Hook, the murals are special to that one.
Yeah.
So I always love the photographs and everything and the stories because they go deep into what those murals stand for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you telling us about another story you enjoy?
Well, you know, there was a story about the Little Hen, which is a restaurant in Haddonfield, and chef at age 68, he just decided to buy the restaurant that he worked at because he said, who's going to hire me? You know, like, and so it's this really acclaimed, great French restaurant. And he had a really interesting perspective. Every story is interesting that we publish,
right?
I think.
I mean, that's inspiring with the Little Hen because a lot of times you have to create the opportunity for yourself.
Yeah.
It's not already out there.
Right, exactly.
That's, you know, rewarding in a whole different way. So let's talk a little bit more about the different series that we have in some of the magazines. So for example, in Haddonfield and in Morristown, they are both historical society towns.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and what we should be looking for.
So in Haddonfield, we recently started a historical home series. And the idea is to tell the story of a house. Many of them are 200 years old or more. And one of our writers has been doing the stories and she does a lot of research. She goes to the Historical Society and does heavy research on the home. And in the latest issue of the Haddonfield magazine 08033, there was this one federal style home. The way I explained it was, it reminds me of this story, this children's book by Virginia Lee Burton called The Little House. And the house, looks like it's smiling in the beginning. It's in the country. And then skyscrapers go up around it, and it starts to look stressed, and it's getting polluted and everything. And then in the end, it's taken to the country and it's happy again. So this house witnessed the creation of the historic district in Haddonfield. There was a time, I believe it was in the 60s, when developers really wanted to get in there and develop, and then residents said, no, let's protect our town, let's protect our history. And so since then, there's very strict rules around the kind of development that can be done. So that's one of the stories it's in the series, but those are turning out really wonderfully. And we're going to do a similar thing for Morristown. But yeah, as you were saying, each of the magazines has their own series and strengths. Each town has different strengths and different character. And so over time, we're developing each one as its own entity and playing to those strengths.
In this day and age of so much AI or a lot of publications using a wire service, we use a lot of local freelancers for our stories, and for our magazine, for our newspapers, we have in-house writers. The magazines, we use a lot of local freelancers. Why do you think it's still important to have your local writer or a writer write out these articles rather than to pulling something from a service?
Well, a really good story, you can feel like you understand someone. That only really happens through honest conversation. People are amazed and astonished when they read a story about themselves, and they can see that that the writers really understood and captured what they went through. And there's just no way to capture that. If you had AI write a story, maybe it would get some things right. But when you do an interview and then you're taking mental notes of, oh, this really struck a chord with me, this really struck a chord, and then you follow up and ask more questions, then you create something, and it's like a bespoke thing that it just can't be. It has to be man-made.
Julia, what would you like to convey to our listeners about reading the magazines? And some of our listeners may not have the magazines, so I do want to say that you can get the magazines from any of the towns on our website, lifestyles.media. But what is something you would like to share with the general public about your feelings towards the magazines or what they convey?
Yeah, they're free. You can read the PDF. You can flip through them and get the whole experience. They're completely free to read, and you can consume them in the way a magazine is meant to be consumed. I hope that people are entertained and amused and informed by the stories. And I think they will be. And I'm always open to pitches. If you want to write for us, if you want to take photos for us, you can reach out. And if you know of a story idea that you think would be good for us, you can email us at lifestyles@Donnelly.Media.
Thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. We're so happy to have you on our team. You have a wonderful experience that you bring to the table to us, and we're very grateful to have you as part of the Donnelly.Media.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
That's a wrap for this episode of Beyond the Pages. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, keep reading between the lines.